Hi, everyone. My name is Marla Dickerson. I am Director of Continuing Legal Education at Southern University Law Center and a member of the Council for Diversity in the Educational Pipeline of the ABA. I want to welcome you all for joining us for this very important discussion. We have 3 sub-panels. One sub-panel will deal with bar exams, the second will deal with finances, and the third will deal with mental health in the COVID crisis. At this particular point in time, I would like to have the panelists, starting off with Ms. Beth Hill, to introduce themselves and their positions.
I'm Beth Hill. I'm with the National Conference of Bar Examiners. I am the Director of Test Development, Operations, and Test Security.
Ms. Marilyn Wellington.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Wellington. I'm the Executive Director of the Board of Bar Examiners for Massachusetts, and I'm also a member of the Board of Trustees on the National Conference of Bar Examiners.
Ms. Marsha Griggs.
Hi, I'm Marcia Griggs, and I'm an associate professor at Washburn University School of Law.
Ms. Tanya Looma.
Hello, my name is Tanya Looma. I'm the Assistant Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at USC John Marshall Law School.
Ms. Teria Thornton.
Hi, I'm Taria Thornton, Manager of Education and Diversity Initiatives at Access Lex Institute.
Ms. Jessica Chinadurai.
Hi, my name is Jessica Chinadurai. I'm currently a copyright registration specialist at the U.S. Copyright Office, and I'm also an advisory member to the ABA's Commission on Lawyers Assistance Programs.
And Ms. Janet Stearns.
Hi everyone, I'm Janet Stearns. I am the Dean of Students at the University of Miami School of Law, and I also am a member of the ABA Commission on Lawyer Assistance Programs.
We will now start our first sub-panel, which deals with the bar exam, and Ms. Beth Hill will start the discussion.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to be here. So my current position, as I said, is the Director of Test Operations, Development, and Security. Previously, I was the Program Director for the MBE program, so developing those tests and making sure we got them to the printer in time and all those things. So one of the things that NCB has done to attempt to make something go smoothly over the course of the bar exam is to make additional materials available to jurisdictions testing in person over the course of the summer and into the early fall. If you go to the NCB website, there's a really colorful map about all the different choices jurisdictions are making with regard to testing in person, testing remotely. And so it's an interesting look at opening up different options for how to get testing done yet this summer and early fall. Those test dates are the typical July 28th to 29th. There are about 17 jurisdictions who are sticking with having some testing on July 28 and 29. There are about 5 jurisdictions who are doing both July and September test administrations in person. About 12 jurisdictions who have moved to the early September 9 through 10 dates. And there are about 4 jurisdictions who are just testing in it's September 30th and October 1st. There are a few jurisdictions who are also doing a July and an October 1st. And then NCB also is offering materials for a remote option, and 10 jurisdictions have chosen that at this point, with a couple of those offering some in-person testing. That remote option is a subset of the materials that are typically offered, the same content, but a shorter time span. And really what we've been trying to do is to work with jurisdictions to find ways, like I said, to enable candidates to be able to test as soon as possible using, the same test materials that are typically offered, and then also that remote option. Another thing I'd like to mention, if anyone is interested in some additional bar review materials, we do have materials through our Bar Now platform, and they are online, and they're questions that basically are the same types of things you would see on a regular MBE, or also has actual MEE and MPT items. So that's a great resource for people to know about, and it is at a fairly reasonable price. So take a look at that. And with all those things being said about different options that states are using test materials over the course of the summer, I'll hand it over to Marilyn Wellington to talk about what is being done in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Beth. Hello, everyone, and thank you for participating in this program. So I have two roles. I'm the Executive Director at the Massachusetts Board of Bar Examiners, but I also sit on the NCBE Board of Trustees. And I think that gives me a little bit of a balance of understanding what we're all trying to accomplish here. And I want to acknowledge right up front what a difficult time we understand this is to be a graduating law student, a rising 3L, somebody who is trying to figure out their path from law school to bar admission. The issues that you are all facing are issues that none of us on this panel, I think, can say we've ever faced in our lives. And so I'm talking to my colleagues, really on behalf of my colleagues across the country at all of the bar examining offices in each jurisdiction and myself, I just want to acknowledge that and let you know that we really are thinking of each of those issues and considering what we feel that you're dealing with as we try to make these decisions. When we make decisions about how we're going to get you from law school to admission to the bar, we really look at a couple of priorities, at least this summer. Our key priority this summer has been your health and safety and the health and safety of the staff that work at the exams. Nothing is more paramount to us than your health and safety. The in-person bar exam is a struggle for many jurisdictions. And as I'm sure you've seen, some jurisdictions have actually had to cancel their in-person administrations fairly late in the game. And we understand the impact that has on you as people trying to figure out if you're going to be able to sit for an exam, where you can sit for an exam. Our goal has been to get you from law school to admission with as minimal a delay as possible. We know that you need to get licensed so that you can start working, job hunting, and living your life. You need to get past this point. So we've all tried to work really hard to see if we can find a way to minimize any delays, but delays are going to happen. So in Massachusetts, what we ultimately did was made a fairly early decision to move from an in-person exam to the remote exam. We actually had earlier on in April, I believe, made the decision to move our exam from July to the end of September, our in-person exam. But it became clearer and clearer to us based on the guidance from our governor and Health and Human Services office here in Massachusetts, that was just not a path, even with the delay in the exam, the likelihood of being able to administer that in-person exam was very low. You know, in Massachusetts, our convention center, which is a necessary facility for us, was in phase 4 of our reopening plan. And phase 4 of the reopening plan in Massachusetts is when a vaccine and/or effective treatments are available. It became pretty clear pretty quickly that that wasn't going to happen by September. So we decided to, as early as we can, let people know that we were switching from that exam, from the in-person exam to the remote exam. We would not have been able to do this if NCBE hadn't found a way, hadn't worked so closely with all the jurisdictions to give us multiple options, to give us options to give the exam in person on different dates, to give us options to give an exam remotely. So we are very grateful to NCBE for all they've done to give us all of these options. The remote exam wasn't our first option. It wasn't something that we wanted to go to, and there were a number of reasons for that. One is it's not a UBE, and I know so many of you as graduates are looking to take a UBE, Uniform Bar Exam, because that gives you portability and flexibility in your career. And we all want that for you. But knowing that our options were to either give the remote exam or make people wait until February, which we didn't want to do, we decided to go with the remote exam to make sure that you had an ability to move forward without an extended delay. So we decided to go to the remote exam, and then a number, as Beth mentioned, 10 states already have gone to the remote, or have announced some sort of a remote exam. Several of us are giving the same remote exam, this October 5th and 6th remote exam with NCBE materials, exam materials. And so in order to help with the portability aspects, we are entering into reciprocity agreements between those states. Any state who's going to give this October 5th and 6th exam, who is interested in signing reciprocity agreements, is doing that. So for example, Massachusetts has already signed several reciprocity agreements. So we are trying very hard to minimize your stress and to give you that path to admission as quickly and as effectively as possible, and allowing us to keep to our standards of protection of the public when we're looking at who should be admitted to the bar. I hope that we're doing these things well. We are doing these things to the best of our ability. I know there are so many questions, and I just encourage you to look at the websites of whatever jurisdiction you intend to apply in. NCBE has provided an enormous amount of information for you on their website, but each jurisdiction has set up a series of FAQs on their websites to answer all sorts of questions on how these exams work, on what you need to do to prepare, and it's all in an effort to make your lives a little bit easier. So I'm going to say one final thing, and this is probably the most important thing that I'll say, is as you're going through this and trying to figure all of this out, ask us questions. Call bar admissions offices, look at websites, ask questions, because we all want what you want, which is to get you through this as effectively and quickly as possible. So thank you.
We will now hear from Ms. Marsha Griggs.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here to share my suggestions for bar study during a pandemic. But first, I want to use at least one of the 12 minutes that have been allotted to me to say that I see you and that we see you, to every current and aspiring bar taker, right? There is not one lawyer walking the earth today that can say that they know what it's like to study for a bar exam amidst the worry and the uncertainty that you're facing. So to anyone preparing for a bar exam, whether your exam is in 12 days, in September, in October, or even in February 2021, we owe you our support, our attention, and our voice. Now, I will share my 6 suggestions for dealing with the unknown. And I hope that you can use these suggestions to maximize and make the most productive use of the study time that you have available. The first is echoing on what Marilyn said: go to the source. The source of all information and rules that govern your bar exam is the Board of Bar Examiners in the jurisdiction where you are or will be registered to take the bar exam. So although there is a mass of information circulating, concern yourself with what your state examiners say, because they are the ones that set the course for your bar and your bar passage. I recommend that you bookmark the examiner's website and check it frequently for updates and announcements. Know how your exam will be scored and learn what items are permissible during testing and what other requirements that your state has imposed. The more information you have, the better you're able to prepare. And the examiner's website is also a very good source for past exams. Many states, but not all, will post past exam questions and either top answers or model answers. I encourage you to incorporate that material into your bar prep. And to the extent that part of your exam will likely contain some multi-state content produced by the NCBE, as Beth mentioned, the NCBE website is also a resource for past questions if your commercial bar prep course has not already licensed those materials and made them available to you. My point number 2, apportion your study time. If there have been changes to your exam, make sure that you understand how those changes will impact the weighting and the weighting of the different exam components. So for example, if your state has changed the weight of the MBE from 30 to 40% to now 50%, you're going to want to apportion 50% of your available study time to MBE prep. It is, of course, natural for bar takers to focus their time on their perceived areas of weakness, right? Areas where their scores have been lower, or topics that you didn't do so well in law school, or even subjects that you didn't study in law school, like those elective courses, secure transactions maybe. It's important though that you keep the big picture and focus. You want to invest your time in proportion to the return on investment. So an area of the bar exam that is weighted at 10 or 20%, that's your weak area. Of course you want to prepare and bring that area up, but you don't want to devote an unreasonable amount of time to something that at best is only going to be a smaller percentage of your bar passage score. Point number 3, assess your needs. The greatest of which right now may be reliable internet. You will need a fast and reliable internet connection if you are taking an online exam. And even if you're taking an in-person exam, you're going to need it to participate fully in your commercial bar prep course. If you know that your service is spotty, try to plan right now for upgraded service or an alternative location to take your bar exam if online. Those of you who are listening who are rising 3L students, this information is especially important to you if all or any part of your bar study plan involved using in-person facilities and services at your law schools. None of us can know today how the continued presence of COVID will impact the next school year. So it's going to be very important for you to start to plan for, you know, continued pandemic conditions, even if you're taking a bar exam later in 2021. And my best advice to those who will be taking a bar exam in the next calendar year, you'll likely want to align yourself with a mentor from the current class of bar takers, someone who can provide you with coaching and guidance that the rest of us who haven't studied or performed a bar exam under these conditions, we haven't experienced that. So that type of firsthand guidance will be very beneficial to you. Number 4 goes hand in hand with number 3. Assess your resources. Identify what tools or what people you have in your life who can help you get what you need for bar study, whether it's in the form of financial support, childcare, or study assistance. Reach out to your supporters now. It's very important that you recognize that your law school can be a big source of support. Each law school, of course, has different budgetary constraints, but you may be surprised to learn that many law schools can provide commercial bar review courses or supplemental bar review courses. They can provide funding for internet service plans or hotspotting, free printing, or more. The only way for you to know what is available to you from your law school is to ask. Don't wait for an email. Don't rely on the website. The detail of the law school's plans may not be published to others. And this is true for any bar taker from graduating from law school. You may have graduated a couple years ago, and this might be your first time taking a bar exam, or you might be for the first time taking a bar exam in a new jurisdiction. Your law school should be a principal point of support for you. And I say that because your law school will be contacting you every year for the rest of your life, seeking your support and your alumni contributions. So it is absolutely in their vested interest to help you. Helping you helps them, and they share your goal. They want to see you pass. And for people for whom an online exam poses a struggle, you might not have the most conducive environment to take an online exam. I encourage you to reach out to your law schools to see if there is a vacant faculty office or a small meeting room or classroom that you could use to take your exam. Number 5 is focus on the familiar and rehearse the unfamiliar. Bar takers don't know what an online bar exam will look like, and we don't either, but we do know a lot about the content. Many of the states that have moved their exams online will use much of the same content as before. So for example, if you're going to be taking the NCB online exam in October, you should or will already be familiar with the components of their exam, the MBE, the multiple choice questions, the multi-state essays, and the performance test. What will be different is how it's going to be administered. So take comfort in practicing what you do know and what you are familiar with, and then adjust your practice. If your exam has moved online, then adjust your practice so that you're practicing online. If you're taking an exam in person, make sure that you're taking at least some of your practice tests wearing masks or in whatever conditions your bar examiners have set for you, right? And again, if your bar company or your law school doesn't have licensed content from the NCBE, I do agree with Ms. Hill that certainly the NCBE website is a great resource for their materials. And then number 6, possibly the most important point of all, connect with academic support. Every ABA law school has a professor or administrative director who is responsible for providing an academic support program, and that usually includes a bar readiness component. In some schools, it may be a team. In other schools, it may be a single person, but find that person and get to know them. If you're not sure who that person is, reach out to your dean of students or your law school dean. They know. Your academic support professors are subject matter experts in studying and learning techniques. They can offer suggestions to help you improve your scores. They can help you with study schedules, which is particularly important if you are balancing work or family commitments while you're studying for the bar exam. Reach out to them and follow all the advice that they give you. They know their stuff. And in fact, they make a point of remaining current on all the changes in all the jurisdictions. So if you have not connected with your academic support person, you are missing one of the most valuable resources in bar study. And my closing, I want to share a quote with you all that I use to motivate myself, especially when I am faced with something that is very difficult, right? And the quote is, "Practice like you've never won." And I take that to heart, and I hope that you will too. Remember that while you are in bar study, right, every practice question that you miss, whatever your practice scores are, they serve a greater purpose of helping you to improve. They're just identifying what you need to get better at. So don't be discouraged by any level of performance in practice, and perform like you've never lost. So my parting words to you all are that you will not take the bar exam in ideal circumstances. That is a fact that none of us can avoid. But on exam day, whenever that may be for you, muster the confidence to show the world exactly the grit and resolve that this class of 2020 bar takers is made of. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. We are going to move forward to our next sub-panel, which deals with career options and finances. Our first panelist to speak will be Tanya Looma.
Hello, I'm so glad to be part of this panel today, and especially when we're looking at what this time means for our 3Ls and recent graduates. I wanted to share a little bit about my experience that I think might be relevant to this time. I graduated in 2009 when the Great Recession was underway, and a lot of my fellow peers had maybe some similar uncertainty that you might feel entering the job market. I looked up some data from that time, and at the time the employment rate was the lowest since the mid-1990s. Approximately 30% of business jobs were temporary. So even if you had a job, you weren't sure how long you were going to have that job or be employed. And almost 22% reported that they were still looking for work, though unemployed, so basically underemployed. And it was a really weak job market, and I know some people from that time ended up practicing law later on in their career, and some just went alternatives to law altogether. So similarly today, the job market might be unpredictable and might be in flux, but there is a way to make sure that you can stay focused and try to accomplish your career goals even when the job market is uncertain. And I want to share a little bit about my experience and some tactics that might be helpful to you. So one of the things that I did was not only talk to people, but I read up on career and job readiness books and options. And in all of my readings and research, I really ended up sticking with the book that I'm going to mention now. Many of you may know it At the time it was new, it had just come out in 2008. By now it's 12 years old, so many people might know it from their own career offices, but it's Kim Allen Walton's book, Guerrilla Tactics for Getting the Legal Job of Your Dreams. And I'll share what was relevant to me from that resource and some of the things that I use in order to secure the job that I wanted out of law school, which I did end up getting. So one of the things that you'll find is that, of course, as part of a law school, legal education, as part of a larger profession, you're going to meet people. Even during this time of COVID, I mean, it might be virtual, it might be through Zoom, but connections are naturally going to happen. And one of the most important things that I tell to my students and that I look for when I speak to students is, what are your interests? What do you want to do? And a lot of students haven't really honed down how they want to present themselves when they speak to people. And so if there's an area of law that you are particularly interested in, whether you're curious or whether you're really interested in working in that field, I think it's really important to present that as who you are and what you want to do. So I would say, and I actually have business cards, and I know a lot of students have business cards now today too. I would say I'm a third-year law student. I'm interested in litigation. And that automatically helps whoever you're speaking to, whether they're practicing or in higher education or some other field related to the law. That person knows exactly where to place you, and they know exactly what their experience, how their experience relates to where you are, and if they have any resources for you. And it's not forward. Some students think that it's too direct. Some students have a little bit of insecurity kind of being so direct, but it's really helpful, and it really helps people know how to support you if they can. So after being direct with people and just telling them what I was interested in, I got a lot of leads and I got a lot of follow-up, not necessarily for jobs, but they told me other people I should speak to, other people that were interested in speaking to law students. And by following up on these contacts, whether they had direct knowledge from me or whether they referred me to somebody else, I got to know the litigation field. I'm based in Chicago. I got to know the litigation field a lot better than I would if I wasn't direct and if I wasn't letting people know my interest. Further from speaking to people and letting them know my interest was informational interviews. Now, informational interviews is you taking the initiative to contact either people you know or people you don't know, to ask them about what it means to do the work that they do. And I was so determined in 2009 to find a job. So not only did I go to alum of my law school, which was USC John Marshall Law, I went to the alum of my undergraduate institution. And if you were related to my undergraduate institution or my law school, and you were working at a firm or somewhere where I wanted to be, I called you or I emailed you, regardless if somebody referred me. And I asked you if I could take you out to coffee or just speak to you on the phone. And a lot of people were open to speaking to me about their experiences and learning more about what I was doing as a law student and how their interest and experience could help me. And what happens is that people get impressed by your ambition, by your initiative, and they will keep you in mind if something that they can think of comes up. And that happened as well. Also, it's really hard to know a culture or the mechanics of any job or organization without speaking to somebody. And even though you don't know that person well, if they're open, they will share some tidbits about what it is to work in that field or at that office or that organization that you wouldn't get at on the website, or just by perusing the materials. So those informational interviews tended to be invaluable. So this is part of a strategic long game. And a lot of these things don't lead to an immediate job, but it helps you be informed and it helps you navigate the field more adeptly. And it puts you on people's radar. And then of course, knowing the information of what it means to practice law day to day is very different than what you learn in the classroom. And what you'll find is that theory and practice differ. So speaking to attorneys at this level also is just helpful for you as a law student. So the last thing I want to say as far as tactics is your law professors. And your law professors are uniquely connected to the alum from your law school because they taught a lot of the alum. And a lot of the alum have a certain affinity towards the professors that helped them, taught them, and groomed them in their experiences as a student and as a young professional. So please talk to your law professors and go to their office hours and make connections with them so that they can connect you to the alum from your school that are in fields that you're interested in. So one of the things that I said in, that I put in the last slide that I want to emphasize now is that people will always be gatekeepers to the opportunities that you want to take advantage of, or the opportunities that you're interested in. So the way people function and the basic components of what it means to work in a group or to be part of the organization are almost always going to be the same. So there's two main things that people look for at any job. One, that you bring value to your position, that you're equipped to do the work, and two, that people like working with you. Those two things go a long, far way. And if anybody in any profession has ever spoken or given a reference for somebody else, they'll talk about their skills, but then they'll also talk about the ability to work with that person, if that experience was positive or not. So one of the things that I want to talk about is not just the skills that you'll bring to your position because you've been educated as an attorney and because you can do legal analysis, but some of the skills that transfer from position to position and that make you valuable regardless of what you're actually doing, even if you're not an attorney. And you might have heard of some of these durable soft skills, but I really wanted to emphasize them because they make you stand out and they make you, they distinguish you from your peers in the job market. So one of the things that I think is really important is how you not only look at, I'm gonna pull out some information here. Not only how you do critical thinking in the terms of legal analysis, but I want to speak a little bit about critical thinking, even though there's several definitions that exist and you might have learned of different ones. The critical thinking I want to talk about is critical thinking that is self-directed, self-disciplined, self-monitored, and self-corrected thinking, meaning you have an understanding of how your own thinking functions and how your thinking either has its weaknesses and strengths, and that you're aware of how your thought processes function and have the ability to assess and shift it. So that means a lot of self-reflection and a bit of introspection on how your thinking processes are affecting your job work and affecting your outcome and the solutions that you're offering. And if you can assess yourself and see where you can always improve how you've performed, you're always going to be one of the workers or somebody that's contributing, increasing value to an organization and not staying stagnant. So I think critical thinking and the ability to self-assess and be self-directed in how you do your work without necessarily looking for external critique, even though that's important as well, is always going to be really important for any job that you do. Another durable skill, communication. And I think this goes without saying, especially as our communication moves from in-person and on the phone to a lot of written communication. I think communication is key for people understanding it and being able to relate to whatever you have to say. And also it coming across in a way that respects and takes into account the stakeholders that are listening and invested in what you're saying. Next is global competence. So in a rapidly changing world, the ability to be engaged and collaborate to problem solve is really essential. So you have to be closely connected to ability to work in a team, but particularly a team of peers who may not have similar backgrounds as you or experience as you. And in a legal context, this can mean working with non-lawyers or international clients. And one of the things you want to ask yourself is, are you intimidated by this group work? Do you feel insecure or tempted to inflate self because you feel like you need to affirm or validate yourself when you're around a team of peers that you may not be as familiar with, or can you find common ground quickly? The next is emotional intelligence. So that's the capability of individuals to recognize their own emotions and those of others and discern between different feelings and label them appropriate, and using this emotional information to guide thinking and behavior. So one of the things that I think this is a fancy, emotional intelligence is sometimes a fancy way of a certain level of professional maturity, navigating environments where there could be drama, there could be negative behavior or words that you don't like. And how do you navigate that and stay professional and use a certain level of emotional intelligence to keep the professional integrity that you want? And I will tell you, any professional will tell you that it's a challenge in any environment to avoid the inevitable messiness of other human beings. And that's just going to be natural. But how do you use your maturity, your professional integrity, your emotional intelligence to navigate those and make sure that you come on the other side with your reputation and your character intact? The next one is working in teams, which is largely related to global competence, but working in teams and collaborating is inevitable. And you're going to have to find a way to always find ways to complement your team members and work together for a common solution. So I won't spend much time on that. So last one, system and design thinking. It's a fancy way of saying, can you look at the big picture? Can you understand how your role or how your function or how your work fits into a larger paradigm and helps the organization and the mission that you're working on to move forward? And can you be a part of that system and design thinking? Or do you kind of are you not able to see the big picture so that you kind of function in a vacuum and not understanding how your contributions either hold back the whole or add to the whole? So it's a little bit of macro thinking and big picture thinking. And this is particularly helpful when you're thinking about where you want to go next in your career or where you want to fit in the future, because systems and designs thinking really helps you to understand maybe where your strengths and where your abilities and capacity really fits in a larger picture as you think about how you want your career to move in the future. Okay, so I have to wind down. Going to the next slide, which I'll cover just briefly. A lot of you already know the difference between government and public interest and private. I just wanted to list here some of the important ones. Government is mostly mission-driven and private is profit-based. So when you think about entering the market, think about the expectations of the different markets that you'll be entering. And one of the biggest things that I want to point out for private is that senior attorneys will always allocate your work, whether it's in public or private. You'll always have a supervising attorney monitoring your work. But especially for attorneys of color, when you go to private institutions, it's and public, but I'll talk about that a little bit. It's really important for you to understand if there's a culture of mentoring, if there's a culture of promotion in that environment for attorneys of color and how they get promoted. This is also important in government and public interest, but public interest tends to have such a large capacity for work that so many people get projects, where in private, projects and work is a lot more tightly allocated. So you'll have to look at that more closely. And I am out of time. I just want to give one more reference on my last slide. So this is some alternatives to entering the job market. If you go to nalp.org, they have a whole guide on JD Advantage jobs that don't necessarily require a JD or don't necessarily require you to practice law. And I think that's a great resource for students as an alternative in an uncertain market. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. We will be moving to our next panelist, Ms. Thornton.
Yes, so I am also going to give a little bit of a similar testimony while you digest what is currently on your screen. I also graduated at a time where we were still reeling from the economic downturn in 2010. But I will tell you that there is absolutely light at the end of the tunnel. Now, while there are opportunities are fluid. Your definition of success is fluid. So you may need to have a plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G at this point, but it's important for you to understand that you can continue to move towards your goals. And I will say from personal experiences that while it may not have been what I had initially planned, they made me uniquely situated and suited for what I'm currently doing, which is very much in line with my passion and my overall goals. So with that being said, continue to think about what you would like to ultimately do and prepare yourself to be able to take those opportunities when they present themselves. So the information that you have here, what we're able to do at Access Lex Institute and what we're so pleased to be able to do is to look at the data, the statistics. And we want to understand trends, and we want to understand, especially in the Center of Financial Capability, which is where I work, to understand how that impacts certain demographic groups. So you will see here, and you may see yourself and some of this information as well. You have demographic groups for students with more than $100,000 worth of debt by race and ethnicity. And you can see how that has changed over the time frame. Now, I don't want this information to discourage you. I don't want you to think that it's something that you cannot overcome, but does it mean that maybe when you see yourself in these demographic groups, or even if it's something that does apply to you, you want to know how you can be strategic about how you can go ahead and accomplish what you want to ultimately without this being a burden that prevents you from achieving your goals. So I want you to see this. I want you to think about what your personal situation may be. And you also may have seen similar statistics about demographic groups when you were being admitted into law school. You've been able to have that grit and resiliency to overcome that. And so this is no different as long as you're going to be strategic about how you do that. So I wanted to give you that information so you can see what the landscape is and to know that you may not be alone depending upon how much you did have to borrow. I will go ahead and talk about the different loans that you may have. And once again, this is about you being strategic. I know finances for a lot of people, given the situations that we're dealing with, causes a lot of anxiety. A lot of that anxiety comes from the unknown. So while we cannot control everything, we want to control the controllable. And that's what's about providing you with information so you have the information to move forward. When we're talking about your loan information, we want you to understand what your obligations are as you're trying to figure out the best pathway for you to meet those obligations. So if you have federal loans, you can find that federal loan portfolio at studentaid.gov. The same way that you logged into your FAFSA with your FSA ID and password is how you will log into studentaid.com. And I know I've dealt with students when I used to do financial aid in a institution. You are sometimes surprised by how much you actually have borrowed and how much interest has accrued over time. So it's important whether you're currently a 3L or even if you've graduated, you probably have done exit counseling, but make sure you know what your federal loan portfolio is. Private loans, they will not be within that studentaid.gov portal that you may go through because they are private loans, but they will be listed on your credit report. So if you want to know the amounts, if you want to know the lender, sometimes those loans do get sold off to other institutions. Make sure you know that information and you can get that from your credit report. And then lastly, also know your other debt obligations. If you have a car loan, if you have a mortgage, if you borrowed from a family friend or whomever, you want to know what all of those obligations are so you can be strategic about how you're going to accomplish paying for the things that you need to and not defaulting on any loans, not getting behind, and you can be as responsible as you can given the circumstances. Now let's talk about your options. And it's important to know that we understand that there may be bumps in the road, but you do have options. As you can see at the bottom, any action is better than no action. Contact your servicer. Your servicer are the entities that you pay back your loans to. If you're having difficulties, if you're struggling, reach out to them and they will have options. And that definitely goes for your federal loans. But even if you have private loans, reach out to them because even especially in the COVID-19 crisis that we're in, they also have options that are available to you. Short-term deferment and forbearance that you see there, both of them stop your obligation to pay. There's a small nuance between the two of them. Deferment, if you do happen to have subsidized loans, the interest will not accrue while you're in deferment. But forbearance also stops your obligation to pay, but unfortunately that interest will accrue on all of the loans within your federal portfolio. You want to consider that interest accrual. If you are able to pay on your loans, think about how you can attack that interest. A big phrase is you want to make sure that you're not going into a negative amortization situation. That's when you're paying on it and you're paying on it, but you're not seeing a difference. And that's because that interest accrual is so big. So if you do have the opportunity to pay on interest, go ahead and do that. If you don't, that's okay. Just make sure that you're still meeting your obligation. Public service loan forgiveness is something that I know that you all may be considering, especially if you're in the public interest field. It is real. It is something that you can qualify for. And even if you're not making a lot of money once you graduate, because there might be some things happening with the economy, that's okay. You can have a qualifying payment of 0 and still qualify for public service loan forgiveness as long as you're meeting that obligation. And then long term, we're hoping that, if you do need to stop your obligation to pay, but there are income driven repayment plans that are based on your family size, your income, and where you live. And sometimes that's doable for people. And once again, you can still move towards public service loan forgiveness or eventually forgiveness in that particular program that you're in. Let's talk about consolidation and refinancing. I know that this is something that's very popular, especially of those of you that may actually end up going into big law or maybe the private firmscape as well. And they sometimes even give it to you with your packets about go ahead and refinance. I want you all, you are future attorneys, to read the fine print. What refinancing is taking that federal loan and turning it into a private loan. You can absolutely refinance with a private loan to another private loan. But if you are thinking about refinancing your federal loans, that is then going to turn it into a private loan. And you lose all that security net that comes along with federal loans. So the forbearance, the deferment, the public service loan forgiveness, all of that goes away if you do refinance. So think about if you want to debt shuffle. Consolidation is something that happens within the federal loan side. And we can talk about, and I'll tell you about an opportunity that is completely free to you that you can talk to myself or others about if consolidation is a good option for you. Let's go ahead and talk about what you need to know. And I apologize that this is cut off, but especially for those of you all who are 3Ls, or even if you're in the midst of preparing for your bar expenses, first you want to know your anticipated expenses. How much is it going to cost you to take the exam? How much is it going to cost you for your living expenses? Whatever the situation, the software that you may have to use for your computers now that they may be remote. Know what those anticipated expenses are so you can prepare for them beforehand. And once again, 3Ls, know what that is for your year upcoming. If you're already in the midst of it, we understand that, but it's not too late to pivot. You also want to know bar loan details if you do find yourself in a situation where you do have to borrow a private loan to cover your bar expenses. For the 3Ls, I will strongly encourage you, if you can avoid a bar study loan, do that. But we understand that that may not be everyone's narrative. If you do have to borrow, once again, we want to make sure that you're knowing the details about your private loans. 3Ls, if you can save up some federal loan money that you don't have to use all of it your 3L year, try to see how you can allocate some of that for your bar expenses. And then lastly are resources for your strategic plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about your resources in just a second. We'll go on to the next slide. What you should look for if you do have to take out a bar study loan. And unfortunately, what we're hearing from students that have recently graduated is that they have not increased the amount that you can borrow for bar study loans because of the extended time that you may have to study. And they're not also giving you more time to pay it back. So we still want to make sure that you're understanding the conditions of a private loan if you do have to take a bar study loan. And that is knowing the loan limits, how much they are allowing you to borrow. Aggregate borrowing, a lot of times they will look at what you borrowed from the federal loan portfolio and compare it to see what you can borrow for the private loan. Also know the differences between your interest rates. Is it fixed? Is it variable? Is it a prime interest rate? Is it based on LIBOR, the London Interbank? Know all of those different concepts. Once again, it's about the fine print. It's about reading the materials that you have when you are applying for the private loan. Also know about capitalization. So when that principal and that interest comes together, how often does that happen? We know with your federal loans that happens at repayment, or if you stop attending at least half time in your program, but that's not always the case for private loans. So know about capitalization. And then lastly, know what are the requirements when it comes time for you to pay the money back, because they will come for their money. So you want to know what the obligation is when it does come time for you to pay. And then lastly, I know that was a lot of information for you all to digest. I know once again, it sometimes feels overwhelming. I know a lot of times people joke that we go to law school because we're not the best with numbers. And if that's you, that's okay. So the great thing is that Access Flex, those of us who do work in the Financial Capability Center, we are all accredited financial counselors, and we can help you through this process. We can help you think about the different options, especially for loan repayment. That is the first thing that we started with, and we are experts in this field of loan repayment and thinking about how you pay for your legal education. And with that, I will turn it back to Marla.
Thank you, Taria. Our last panel, extremely important in these times, we are going to discuss mental health strategies. Our first panelist is Ms. Janet Stearns. Ms. Stearns, it's all yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's really great to have this opportunity to speak with you. And that was a lot of information. So let's just take a deep breath. And I want to shift our attention a little bit to trying to help think about strategies that we can all use in these stressful times to try to feel that we have a little bit more control and a little more focus to do what we need to do. And I want to let everybody know that I spend my days talking with our University of Miami law students, but also working really closely with the ABA Law Student Division on national strategies and programming that can help support law students and their well-being throughout the year. So we want to focus a little bit on where you are right now as 3Ls and recent graduates, and trying to think about this process of conquering the bar exam in these most exceptionally stressful times. So the first question I ask is, can we actually be happy and healthy and pass the bar? I myself have taken the bar 4 times in 3 jurisdictions. I have not been happy and healthy through all of them, but I can tell you the times I passed, I was a lot happier and healthier. So we want to focus on things that are within your control, either right now, if you're trying to take the bar in 2 or 4 or 6 weeks, but if you're a 3L, things that you can start to do to give yourself a little bit more resilience and perhaps a little more practice, so you will be that much more ready when the bar exam is upon you. So on our next slide, I wanna highlight that it's really important to have your village, as the African proverb goes, and to really think about those people who are there to support you. We've heard about some of those people already on this program today. Access Lex and trying to think about your finances is an important part of your village. Your academic support program at your law school and your deans of students are a really important part of your village as well. For some of you, you may already have a mental health counselor. You might be going to your campus counseling center. You may have a private therapist who helps and supports you. And if you do, you want to keep that person available as a part of your village during this really stressful time. For some of you, family will be a support, or a boss, or a mentor, or perhaps somebody who has nothing to do with law school at all. Somebody from a church or your choir, or maybe it's your dog. But you want to have your community around you to support you in this difficult time. And I also like to say, I think you want to think hard about people that you might want to perhaps exclude from your village while you're studying for the bar, people who add stress to your life. That friend who's always complaining, or that study group person who really, sets off your buttons and makes you more stressed out than normal. You have to really protect yourself, particularly in that time when you're trying to focus on the bar, and make sure that you have the people around you that you need, and really try to minimize contact with those people that you do not need. Now, I'm a huge fan of exercise during the bar. I am a huge fan, and not to say that I am the most, athletically fit person, but for one thing, we really know that exercise can really improve your alertness, your attention, and actually there's been a lot of research on the neuroscience of the relationship of exercise and memory retention. So we do a lot at University of Miami to really try to incentivize exercise while people are studying for the bar. Having a routine, whether you prefer, yoga or walking or jogging, having some strategy. Obviously, in these COVID days, even for myself, it is sometimes Zoom yoga on my bedroom floor. And for some of us, it involves other kinds of exercise. But this should be built into your schedule, because it really does help you feel better. It helps you be less stressed. And actually, it really, I do believe, goes hand in hand with success on the bar as well. So I'm a huge fan of this, and I want to encourage all of you. I think another thing that's really important is trying to think about the value of mindfulness and meditation and the relationship of that to the bar exam. And in this vein, I want to mention a little paperback book that I like to talk about. I do not get any money from the author at all, but I have met the author, Chad Noriel, who actually is at Arizona State University. And he has written a book called The Zen of Passing the Bar. And he comes and talks to our students at University of Miami as well. So I've heard him talk about the book. And the great thing about the book is it really is very connected with, I think, a much larger sense of how Zen in our own lives can really help us tackle all kinds of difficult things. And the bar exam is one difficult thing, but not the only difficult thing, right? So I do believe that this book can just help us get into this mindset of really contemplating whether you're running a marathon, whether you're hiking a mountain, whether you're caring for a loved one who is critically ill. There are tough things in our lives that we have to conquer, and a lot of this is about finding our inner sense of strength and calm so that we can do it. And I think that Chad Noriel's book is, I find it very inspirational as well as we apply this to this moment of the bar exam. So I do highly recommend that. My next point that I really want to focus on, again, is coming back to the idea of counseling or help. You've probably heard already in this panel the word anxiety or stress many times. And we know that in general, there are a lot of law students who are feeling normal levels of anxiety and stress. There probably are a lot of us even speaking on this panel right now who at various points, particularly over these last 3 or 4 months, have experienced some significant anxiety and stress. And we need to be willing to reach out for help. And this is a cartoon, an old Snoopy cartoon, which was a big thing many years ago when I was little, but this idea of reaching out to get the psychiatric help is something that we must remember. Along with that, we want to be mindful that in this current moment, certainly since March, that there is a lot of teletherapy that is available. Some of our campus counseling centers are doing teletherapy. In some cases, private counselors as well may be doing teletherapy. And you want to look at resources that you have, if you need it, either on a regular basis or in a moment of some anxiety or panic, that you can get the help and support that you need. It is really important to make sure that you have health insurance, because in fact, in some cases, when you need to access this kind of these kinds of resources, it will be really helpful to have health insurance to pay for it. And to that end, I know that working with the ABA Law Student Division, there was a wonderful panel just about a month ago that helped people to understand a little bit more about health insurance options. Whether you have health insurance currently with your law school, whether you want to look for other short-term health insurance to tide you over until such time as you have a job and you are able to start working and hopefully have other health insurance. So that's, I think, another thing that you want to keep on your checklist. And as has been said before, reach out, ask for help. The ABA Law Student Division does have some health insurance resources and guidance that you might want to consider. And we're all going to be here to help give you appropriate resources depending on what state you're in. Finally, I really want to emphasize something that's a real passion of mine, which is trying to make sure that there is nothing in the bar regulatory process, particularly the character and fitness process, that will keep you from stopping to get the kind of help that you want to get. So there are many of us, including some of the people here on this call, who have worked really hard to try to make sure that the character and fitness questions do not ask you about a situational counseling, that they do not try to ask you intrusive information, whether you're taking medications to help control anxiety or depression or other things. And I think that we're making some huge progress state by state in trying to help mitigate any kinds of questions that might create a problem for you at the time that you're actually applying for the bar. I think many of us would look at it, those of us who are older and already practicing lawyers, that we recognize about ourselves in knowing ourselves that sometimes the very best thing we can do is reach out for help, including counseling and professional help, so that we are able to do our jobs and function in our families and take care of our own health. So I really want to encourage you to do the same. And again, I am more than happy to answer questions about that. This is a topic that I do talk about quite a lot with my own law students. So finally, I just want to give you a couple of personal tips. And I want to tell you that in my office at the University of Miami, I have the Serenity Prayer framed next to my desk. And I'm going to take a moment to read it to you. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I actually just quoted that to my dean this morning as we were trying to make some tough decisions. This guides me through many things in my life. Now, as we think about the pandemic, and if we look at the next slide, the fact is, and I saw this on social media, but I think it sort of, captures the idea. There are things we cannot control. I do not know how much toilet paper is going to be at the grocery store tomorrow. I do not know exactly how long this is going to last until we have a vaccine. So staying up to worry about that does not help me right now. What are the things that I can control when I wake up in the morning? I can control my attitude about life and what I am going to do and how I'm going to feel successful. I can find fun things to do with my family and how I'm going to eat in a healthy way and reach out to my family and be kind and take care of myself so that I can do my very best and I can feel good about myself, and we can try to move through this process and still maintain our health. And so I want to really encourage everybody to keep that framework in mind the very best that you can. And to hope that that will give you a little bit more sense of control and also a sense of happiness and calm as we push through and continue to tackle all the things that we cannot control in the days and weeks ahead. So with that, I want to turn things over to my colleague and friend, Jessica Chinadurai. Jessica is a wonderful lawyer from Washington, D.C., and she is also with me on the ABA Commission on Lawyers Assistance Programs. And she's going to talk to you a little bit more about that and her own path. Jessica?
Thank you, Janet. So I'm here today to talk about how my state lawyers assistance program really helped me through a period of facing uncertainty after graduating from law school. So just a little bit of backstory, I graduated from the University of Missouri School of Law in 2018. I sat for the Missouri bar exam that summer, and even though I had several job interviews, I didn't actually land the position that I'm in until a full year later to the date in May of 2019. So while our country wasn't experiencing a global pandemic or an economic recession in 2018, I feel like I can somewhat relate to the feelings that you're going through related to anxiety, fear, maybe a little bit of anger and sadness and just overall frustration with studying for the bar and looking for job opportunities in a really difficult sort of market. I can only imagine how much harder it is with COVID happening as well. But one shared feeling that I wanted to bring up, or that comes to mind, is certainly isolation. So right now, definitely with social distancing, but for me, in my situation, it felt like a completely overwhelming feeling of being alone in my situation when others had no problem finding a job after graduation. It felt like I was maybe one of 3 to 5 people who really had a tough time landing a job. And so maybe some of you can relate to that sort of feeling now, where you know that there's this nationwide community within the law school communities and the legal communities overall, where you feel like everyone's going through the same situation, but maybe you're experiencing it entirely differently. And that might be because of your racial background, your age, your gender. There are all sorts of different factors that can kind of make this situation even more challenging than it is right now. I myself had been pretty lucky up until 2018. I had no problem landing internships in undergrad. I had no problem finding a job after undergrad and before law school, as well as finding summer internships in law school. And what all of that meant in the end is that I was completely underprepared and completely overwhelmed when it came to the mental and emotional toll that being unemployed had on me at that period that time in my life. So in November of 2018 is when I really hit rock bottom. That was less than 2 years ago, which is hard to believe, but I really hit rock bottom in the sense that I was just in a pit of absolute despair, just facing complete darkness, and I felt like there was no light at the end of the tunnel. For me, I equated being unemployed to just being completely unlikable as a person, which was really hard for me to process. And what was interesting was this was happening during a time when I had actually found out my bar results. I had passed the bar exam, but even in light of that, being unemployed was just incomparable and something that I couldn't kind of process or understand. Maybe a lot of you relate to that feeling right now with COVID, where you're asking yourself, why is this happening to me? And that was a question that was on my mind frequently, very frequently. For you, it might be more like, why did I have to graduate? Or why am I a 3L in law school as the COVID crisis is happening? So we can go to the next slide. It was in that same month in November of 2018 that I attended my state Lawyers Assistance Program conference. So Lawyers Assistance Programs, we commonly refer to and use the acronym LAP. So I'll refer to them as LAPs from here on out. And basically on this slide, I just have LAP's general mission. They exist in each state to assure that every judge, lawyer, and law student has access to support and assistance when confronting alcoholism, substance use disorders, or mental health issues. So LAPs everywhere provide hands-on services and support to those in need of assistance. One aspect of that hands-on support is actually in free and confidential counseling. So Janet had mentioned maybe your school is offering counseling, or maybe you're seeing a private therapist, but in the situation where you're looking for a resource that is absolutely free and absolutely confidential, you can definitely turn to your state LAP. Additionally, they also do provide referrals to outside resources if that's something that you're in need of. Aside from that, the hands-on services and support actually also includes education. So for me, when I attended that conference, they gave me this well-being toolkit, which I've included a link to. It was created in 2018 by the American Bar Association, and there's actually a brand new well-being toolkit as of this week that was released for law students. So I think that the 3Ls listening on this call will find that really beneficial. We can go to the next slide. So I wanted to highlight 3 specific worksheets from the toolkit that really helped me. The word toolkit itself really resounded with me, just because it didn't mean that I was incapable as a human being. It just meant that this toolkit was there to kind of equip me with additional resources and really help me through a challenging time. So worksheet number 3 was focused on a gratitude practice. Some of you might have heard about this. There's definitely a lot of positive psychology studies that are related to understanding just how being thankful and thinking about things that you're thankful for every day can really help and lend a hand to your overall positivity. The app that I've included here, that little icon, is actually an app that you can find on your phone, and it's called Gratitude Happiness Journal, so I definitely recommend that. The second thing was worksheet number 10. It was all about strengths evaluation. So I'd mentioned that I felt unemployable and therefore unlikable, but the strengths evaluation that the VIA character Character Institute puts out, they really helped remind me of the things that I do have to offer, not just in a professional setting, but in a personal setting. And it was mentioned before, you know, that you can maybe work on contract or pro bono opportunities in the meantime. And this was actually a way that I really felt called to volunteer myself in different volunteer opportunities and take advantage of my skill sets that way. The last thing here, Janet had briefly mentioned related to mindfulness. This is worksheet number 7 in the toolkit. I know that mindfulness is one of those buzzwords that's really still floating around out there, but this worksheet really helped me nail down what that practice meant for me. So the 8-week program that I've included here, it's a book by Mark Williams and Danny Penman. Because I was unemployed, I had the full 8 weeks to really spend on understanding what mindfulness was and how I would practice that every day. So a lot of you might think that mindfulness and meditation are the same thing, but I just wanted to differentiate the concepts there. So mindfulness is more about the practice of bringing awareness to our thoughts in a non-judgmental way. So some of you right now might be feeling that your anxiety related to all of this is silly in light of everything else that's going on, or that it's foolish. But I think with mindfulness, what it is we sit with that anxiety rather than try and judge it or put a name on it or put a value on it as good or bad. That was really important to me. And I think that as you maybe encounter spiraling thoughts where you sit and worry about the job opportunities that are out there or the bar exam, it could also then spiral into just worrying about COVID overall, or just worrying about all of the kind of racial injustices that we're seeing across the country. And that can really, really spiral. But with mindfulness, it just asks us to take that pause. So I wanted to invite us on the next slide to take that pause as well. Whenever you are encountering those spiraling thoughts, the first thing that we can do is maybe just stop whatever we're doing. If you're writing, maybe just stop and put down the pen. If you're washing the dishes, just put down the dish and just shift. If you're sitting in a chair, just lean back maybe, or lean forward, just shift physically, and then take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. And that right there is mindfulness. It's actually different from the concept of meditation, where meditation helps us cultivate that awareness in a very certain sort of scenario. But mindfulness can be as easy as us just stopping that sort of thought pattern. For me, what that meant with the job search was shifting mentally from asking myself over and over, why is this happening to me? I then started to ask myself, what is this experience trying to teach me? I do want to clarify, I don't think that there is something that you all need to learn from COVID. I am not saying that it was something that is meant to happen as part of your law school experience or becoming a lawyer. And that's actually why I included this last quote on this slide, that mindfulness is not about accepting the unacceptable. It's about a level of awareness that allows you to assess your goals and find the optimum path towards realizing your deepest values. So maybe there is something that you can learn during this challenging time about your goals, about your specific values that can help you be a better lawyer or a better advocate in the future. For me, mindfulness actually helped me accomplish what's on the graphic on this slide, which is just understanding that my career didn't define my worth. Becoming a lawyer and being a lawyer is really only one aspect of our identities, but making sure that we take care of our mental health means that we're protecting and preserving our entire identities and our whole beings. So I encourage you to kind of check out that toolkit that I provided the links to. I want to remind you as well that your state lawyers assistance program does exist as a resource, and I hope that you turn for it and ask for help in this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. At this time, we have a couple of questions that have been submitted. If you do have a question for the panelists, please use the question and answer button at the bottom of the screen. The first question that we have submitted is, where would we as students take a remote exam and what locations are to be allowed? And any of our panelists, Beth or Marilyn?
I can take that question.
Okay.
Marilyn.
Oh, thanks, Marilyn.
Oh, sorry, Beth, I didn't know. So that's really up to each state that's administering the remote exam as to how they'll do that. In Massachusetts, People can take the remote exam at home if they, you know, have an appropriate space at home to do that, as long as they're alone in a room. Many law schools are allowing people to sit at the law school. I know one of the concerns that we've heard from many students, and we will work with them on, is that they may not have access to an appropriate space for testing. They may not have a quiet space at home for testing, or they may be concerned about unstable internet access. In Massachusetts and in any state that's giving the remote exam, in that case, you should reach out to the Office of the Board of Bar Examiners, because we will work with you to set up a space to ensure that you have a space that's really appropriate for taking an exam, and also provides the internet access that you need. But there are a number of places that you can take it. You don't have to be at your home. You can be, like I said, at a law school or a library. But if you need assistance with that, you should definitely contact the Office of the Board of Bar Examiners in your jurisdiction, and they will work with you on that.
Okay, and our next question, Jessica, the toolkit that you mentioned, could you put the link in the chat form for everyone, or just say where the toolkit could be found?
Yeah, if you Google CoLAP or just look up ABA CoLAP, I think that's a great starting point too. We actually have the entire directory to all state lab programs, so that'll be a good place to start too.
Yes, and I think it is also on the ABA Law Student Division page, because it was a joint project.
Do we have any other questions for our panelists? Okay, going once. I know people have to have time to type, so I'm gonna count slowly. Going twice. Okay, so I do have someone who said, what camera? It says, how is the camera working? Do we know what camera?
Probably asking about the online exams.
Proctor.
So that's probably like Beth
Yeah,
or
the
Marilyn.
device for the proctor.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I understand the question completely. I can tell you with the in Massachusetts with the remote exam, the computer camera, you're monitored through remote proctoring through artificial intelligence. That is, it's monitoring you throughout the exam. I believe most states are doing it the same way. The camera, if I'm answering the question correctly, or the question I think this is, the camera is looking at you and watching you throughout the process. Where there are unusual movements or a person leaves the screen, then there may be a flag on that film, and a second person, a live person will, after the exam, will look at that to determine whether there was some concern. We have had in Massachusetts, and I'm sure in other jurisdictions, a lot of questions with this around what if I do have to get up. You know, we ask people to stay in front of the screen for the full 90 minutes of each session. What if I have to get up to, you know, stretch my back because I have a back problem, or to go to the restroom because I need to go to the restroom more than within that 90-minute period. In that case, in Massachusetts, at least, we're asking people just to contact our office and let us know that that may be a concern for you, so that we can keep that in mind as we review the tapes of the remote exam. So I hope that answered the question.
Did you have something else to add, Beth?
Oh, that covered it.
Okay.
And again, just be in close contact with your jurisdiction, because it is up to the jurisdiction, you know, just in terms of reviewing the AI flags afterwards. There are some vendors that are using human proctors as well. So there are a couple different models depending on the jurisdiction and the vendor they're using to display that remote test material.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
We have 2 more questions thus far. Can someone explain virtual scrap paper as it relates to the online bar exam?
I can take that question. So virtual scrap paper, at least for purposes in Massachusetts, as Beth mentioned, every jurisdiction does it a little bit differently depending on their on the software that they have and on the rules in their own jurisdiction. But in Massachusetts, we'll have virtual scratch paper, which is just a box on your screen where you can jot notes as you're reviewing exam questions. I think it's important for all of it, but I think it's particularly important for the essay section of the exam to have a place to jot down notes, and it'll show up as a box on the screen. It'll remain on the screen along with your answer, your response, and the question.
Thank you. Marilyn, you touched on this a little bit about contacting your office in Massachusetts if you're sitting for the Massachusetts bar exam, if you may have some issues that would prevent you from sitting in a location for an extended period of time. Does anyone else have any advice on how the online remote bar exam may affect persons who have disabilities, or give any advice for persons who may have disabilities in those instances?
I'm happy to answer that, to offer a little advice on that as well. So if you are somebody who requires accommodations as a result of a disability under the ADA, in Massachusetts, I believe in other jurisdictions as well, it's the same process with the remote exam for applying for those accommodations. There will be some people who in need of accommodations, accommodated testing, who will end up testing in person so that we can ensure that we're providing all of the accommodations that are necessary. So I encourage you, if you applied for accommodations in a jurisdiction before they switched to the remote exam, I encourage you to contact them to make any adjustments in the accommodations request that you may need. If you have needs because of the remote exam, I encourage you to contact the Board of Bar Examiners in that jurisdiction to put to let them know what your needs are for that. But accommodations requests, you know, the process for requesting accommodations or applying for accommodations is unchanged. It's just that we need to be sure that the accommodations are appropriate, that the applicant tells us what accommodations they need based on a remote exam, if that's different than what would have been an in-person exam.
Thank you, Marilyn. We have a question for Janet. Is there a way to simulate virtual scratch paper, and are there examples?
For me, about scratch paper?
Yes.
I would actually defer to people in academic support who are working with folks on bar prep on sort of the best strategy for working on that virtual scratch paper process. That's a little bit outside of my expertise.
Okay.
I don't know, Marcia, do you have other thoughts on that?
I was hoping that either Beth or Marilyn would share that, since this is the new product for the online exam, and part of our role in academic support is to simulate as closely as possible, you know, what the exam will look like. Do you guys have any tips for us that we could share with our students when we're giving practice exams?
The only tip I can share with you is, you know, we're all working with the vendors. I have not seen the virtual scratch paper, but I can assure you that students will be given ample opportunity to test the software, to do mock exams, to try it out, to become comfortable with the software, and including this virtual scratch paper. We in Massachusetts will require that students, examinees, complete a couple of mock exams in advance, but they'll also have the opportunity to do more than what is just required to really get comfortable with the software and the virtual scratch paper.
Yeah,
and just to piggyback on that, I think it is important that because the jurisdictions are using different vendors, that each jurisdiction using the remote option will be sending out instructions about, here's when you need to go and log in, here's when you need to download. And I know they do an amazing job following up with people, but that would be a great thing to encourage students to be monitoring their email accounts. Sometimes people's email accounts change, and just to have that contact information current with their jurisdiction.
Thank you all. Do we have any further questions for the panelists? I want to first thank our panelists for taking time out of their day to give us this wonderful and incredible information, as we are all experiencing unprecedented times, especially our law school students who are preparing to either take the bar exam in September or October, or those who are entering their 3L year. Also, it's very important to mention that we have attendees who may work in academic support, and this is wonderful information for all of us who work very closely with our students in our respective law schools. And so this has been very informative. I thank you all, the attendees, for registering for this information. For this session. If you would like to have a replay, please know that the recorded panel session will appear on the ABA link in which you registered, and it is also found in the chat. And again, our bios for the panelists can also be found on that same page. So we thank you all and appreciate your attendance here.